Innocents' Day, 1917, Belmont, Trinidad. Ira Clarke, a schoolmistress and piano teacher, gave birth to her only child, a boy. Her husband Cecil was delighted. They called him Ellis Emmanuel Innocent Clarke. The Clarkes were comfortably off. Trinidad then was a colony of the British, but young Ellis's education did not suffer for this. Take Ellis's grandfather, for instance.
When he did bookkeeping at some place, Ross's or something, of course I was told all these things, I wasn't born yet. And I understood that when he started, he sent his wife, who was our mother, with a baby on a holiday, and they traveled with their nurse, and that's what I was told. And the manager of the place where he worked, his wife had also traveled, and they were white people. And when she came back, I suppose she related this thing, how Mrs. Pollard was there with her nurse and baby. And they sacked my father. So that's how he opened his own business. So he opened his cocoa store, and he did very well.
Ellis's grandparents were a genteel, educated and religious family with good social connections. Among them, Muzumbo Lazar, an eminent lawyer who adopted one of Ellis's aunts, Hilda. Lazar was famous for his lavish parties in his stately home, which Ellis was to inherit, but racial barriers were still strong at the time.
Whites didn't have colored friends, and even some of the colored people, if they were in very good position, they didn't want the blacks and so on. There was a lot of division. But we really knew a lot of colored people, you could call them. So much so there were some Jofois whose father was, you could say, white. The mother was white and the father was very fair. And he was my sister's godfather. That's Ellis's mother, you see. So we had friends like that, and we had black, we had colored, the white people respected my mother very much and father.
Ellis's father died when he was very young, and his mother was to be his greatest influence. Till the age of 7, he attended his mother's school, where his aunt Amy Pollard also taught him. At 3, he was meticulous, musical, and lived by his wit.
She told him, no, Ellis, you can't go there, it's ice cream. I want ice cream. She said, no, but you can't have ice cream now. You'll have it later because you were sleeping. You must have a reason. I don't want reason. I want ice cream. That's what he said,
By the age of 4, he had learnt his tables.
He was pretty clever. And I would have to make him form the different figures and letters and so on. But I just couldn't get him to make the figure 3. Couldn't get him to make it. But at that time he could count, he could count from 1 to 100.
And was finicky about his grammar, as the family cook was to find out.
He would go into the kitchen with the cook and teach her tables, And then he was very careful of his English. So if he heard her say the wrong grammar, he would correct her. She'd say, I is. No, Elizabeth. Her name was Elizabeth. Not I is, I am.
At 7, he attended the Christian Brothers School, where he excelled. But to everyone's surprise, he failed to win the college exhibition.
All the accounts about me always speak of me as an exhibitioner. I was not a very good... you're not a racing person, are you?
No.
All right. I wasn't a very good 2-year-old. I developed better as a 3-year-old than as a 4-year-old.
He went to that other place. I went to QRC. But I recall him as a chubby lad coming from Belmont and going across to St. Mary's College, quite often laden with books. He's a very studious young man. Most of us played some cricket or some football. I don't think he did much of that for St. Mary's, but we all knew that Ellis was going to go places.
I couldn't imagine him getting into a fight. As he speaks now, at that time also he spoke in the same sort of way, very deliberate and everything else, very thoughtful. He always thought before he spoke, so he never said anything stupid.
He was a prize student of St. Mary's College and easily won all coveted academic accolades. But however bright, there was something of the innocent in Ellis, and his former classmates still remembers.
As a young boy, he joined the first Trinidad Sea Scouts. But, I don't know how long he remained in the troop, the Scouts, because you see, the first time he went on a camp, on a scout camp, for instance, he didn't seem to appreciate that when you went on a scout camp, you were roughing it and so on. He brought his nice teacup and sauce and so on, like if he was going out to a sort of a party.
In 1936, he won the gold medal and an Ireland scholarship. His performance was extraordinary. In 6 papers in Latin and Greek, his average was close to 90%.
The background of the classical languages, and we did Roman history and Greek history and higher certificate and so on. That certainly was a big advantage. You find people nowadays, they are quite ignorant. They don't do Latin or Greek anymore, and they're quite ignorant about ancient history, which is so important to understand the present.
Young Ellis always wanted to do law, and that is what he did. In 1937, he left for University College London and the bar at Gray's Inn, London. On his return from England, it didn't take long for Ellis Clarke to establish himself as one of the foremost legal brains in this country. He was only 24. It was his first murder prosecution case versus Sir Gaston Johnson, a veteran criminal lawyer in his 70s who had never yet lost a case.
He said, Miss Lazar, your nephew ain't got a chance, because he was hearing of Mr. Gaston Johnson. So she was so disturbed. So after a time, she told him, go back again and hear what. Miss Lazar, what a turnover. You could hear a pin fall. My nephew was speaking, you see, Ellis was speaking, and he won the case. He won Gaston Johnson. So it was the first case that Gaston Johnson had ever lost.
26, he turned down what would have been a plum job offer, a magistracy. His practice over the next 13 years was lucrative and prestigious. Then in 1952, at 35, he met and married 31-year-old Ermintrude Hagley. On February the 7th, 1955, Ermintrude gave birth to their son Peter, and in August 1956, their daughter Margaret Ann was born. In 1954, he decided to leave his lucrative practice to serve his country. He accepted the post of Solicitor General. Thereafter, his rise was swift. In 1956, he was made Deputy Colonial Secretary. 3 years later, he was appointed Attorney General when he served on the Executive Council of the first PNM government. Then a crisis. 1961, Jamaica pulled out of the Federation. There was a constitutional quandary. As the late Dr. Williams said, 1 from 10 equaled naught. The then nationalist bright lights, like Scotty Lewis and William Demas, approached Williams for the next step.
He came across to us frowning and remarked, what are you fellas doing here? Have you no work to do? So I said, well, your work, we came to see what you want us to do. Well, do about what? He said, Jamaica's left the Federation. What are you going to do now? What is Trinidad and Tobago going to do? Oh, he said to O'Halloran, oh, John, yes. Let's set up a committee. Scotty, you are chairman of the committee. William, you on it. Who else?
They turned to Sir Ellis, who had just been appointed Chief Justice. Lewis went to the PNM headquarters with a suggestion.
Mr. Ivan Williams, who was a staunch PNM person, came up and he said, what are you doing here, Mr. Lewis? I said, I've got a message for Dr. Williams, but your men won't let me in. Just open the door and let Mr. Lewis in. So I went in, and there on a raised platform, Dr. Williams, O'Halloran, Larry Constantine, all the whole, Dr. Solm, all the people. I sent him up a note saying, held first meeting this morning, may we approach Ellis for some help? I could see first a frown on his face, then a big smile. He sent back the note saying, okay.
I took the view that because Jamaica had in effect seceded from the Federation, that it was not proper to hold Trinidad to the Federation. obviously we'd have had to bear tremendous costs, all the burdens of this. And we'd have had a lot of disputes and differences arising with all the other territories. The Colonial Office seemed to think that they could just amend the existing legislation and carry on with the Federation. I took a different view, and eventually I went to London. I think I convinced them of this.
Scotty Lewis, who followed Sir Ellis as ambassador to Washington, calls Sir Ellis the father of the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago.
I said to him on one occasion, as chairman of this committee, as we are talking around the subject, we don't know what the British government will do about setting up a new federation of 9. Why don't you draft a constitution as though Trinidad and Tobago would be independent? Which he did in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, I think. I've frequently said since then that Ellis was the father of most of our constitutions. Within about 3 weeks, he had a constitution ready.
And then, to the amazement of those within and those without the federal government, we decided to go on to independence, just as Jamaica was doing, leaving it open to any or all of the others to join us in some sort of association, whether it's a unitary state, as a federation, as a confederation, whatever it might be. Again, as you know, history to prove that nobody joined us.
Sir Ellis did not take up the appointment of Chief Justice after all.
I remained advising the Prime Minister. Eric Williams was then the Prime Minister. And if I may say so, he relied very much on me for advice back in those days.
Sir Ellis's legal experience and tact helped Trinidad and Tobago prepare for independence. For instance, during tough negotiations in London with the then BOAC over the purchase of BWIA.
BOAC had produced a memorandum that contained some elements in it that we felt we couldn't live with. And Alan Rees was much more aggressive than our thing, and he practically flew at Sir Matthew's throat and assured him that the Trinidad government would never accept that. Ellis had a way, he still perhaps has it, of appearing to be half asleep when things are going on. And when Alan was finished, he woke up and said, "Well, Sir Matthew, I think you have produced an excellent memorandum. There are 1 or 2 minor points that I hope you will be willing to consider some suggestions for change." Given this change in attitude between Sir Alan's aggressiveness, almost wanting to cuff him out of the chair, and Ellis's saying it was a good memorandum and only 1 or 2 minor things to be changed, he said, "Yes, of course, Sir Ellis, of course." Well, he says, on page, say, 10 or 12, you say in paragraphs on number 60, whatever it is, so-and-so, I wonder whether you would consider a slight change to say so-and-so. I said, "Of course, it's an excellent idea. Yes, we can go." "Well, then, in that case, you may have to make a slight change on page 2. You see, well, yes, go on. And I wonder whether you would consider, say, on page 6 or something, a slight adding. So, yes, go on. At the end, we got everything that we wanted. And everything that Alan didn't want was removed because Ellis, people said, well, one of the newspapers said some nonsense about sweet talking. It wasn't sweet talking, it was diplomatic, the use of diplomatic language and the diplomatic approach.
1962, independence for Trinidad and Tobago. Sir Solomon Hochoy became our first Governor General. Ellis Clarke was knighted and was posted overseas as the first ambassador to the United States and permanent representative at the United Nations. The duties of ambassador to Mexico and representative at the Assembly of the OAS was added to his portfolio.
Black people were not living in that area. And when I saw the deed of purchase of that residence, it specifically stated that that residence was not to be let to Negroes, Indians, colored people, some others, a whole list of things. And you may say, well, how did we come to live there? It was in the time of Kennedy. And Kennedy had decided that those restrictions had to go where diplomatic occupancy was going to be involved. It was a government having the thing. But I myself too had to carry on in the tradition of Ellis in the neighborhood and let people know that I too spoke a little English and I wasn't uncivilized.
As Prime Minister Eric Williams noted, Sir Ellis soon became the spokesman for small nations. He was a passionate supporter of true independence for territories in the Caribbean. In 1969, he was given the nation's highest award, the Trinity Cross. And then, in 1973, Sir Solomon Hochoy retired as Governor General. By then, Sir Ellis Clarke was already a statesman and was recalled home.
Was driven straight to the Red House, to the Parliament building, it was sworn in as Governor General and driven in to Governor General's house. And that was my life for 14 years.
His inauguration as Governor General in 1973 was to be the first of many a joyous and jovial evening on these gracious grounds. The Governor General's house was built in 1886 from stones from the Laventil Quarry. It is 3 stories high and a beautiful relic of colonial times. When Trinidad and Tobago became a republic in 1976, Sir Ellis Clarke was made our first president, and he held the office with all its privileges and duties, among them the power to grant presidential pardons and set up commissions of inquiry.
The President acts in accordance with the advice of the Cabinet or minister appointed for the purpose by the Cabinet. So that when an act says the President may do the President, it means the Cabinet. So to that extent, he really is a figurehead.
Sir Ellis was so intertwined with the making of our fledgling nation that there were times when he was accused of being a party man, an allegation strenuously denied by Ira Mathur, who was a minister in the People's National Movement government at the time. But Sir Ellis's relationship with the late Dr. Williams was undoubtedly a close one.
Eric Williams was the most difficult man to deal with. But he and Sir Ellis were quite close for a while. And there was a period when every Thursday after Cabinet, Dr. Williams would go to the President's home to have lunch and to discuss matters of state and so on.
Sir Ellis maintained he also received members of the opposition to President's House. Among them was Basdio Pandey, the present leader of the opposition UNC.
I've never been a member of the PNM. I've never had anything to do with party matters at all.
However, many members of the then government did count on his diplomacy and vast knowledge of the law.
In 1973, for example, when this country was very short of money, Sir Ellis played a very important role in getting a company like Texaco to give us a loan. When we had problems with some of the multinational corporations, Sir Ellis it was who would smooth the waters.
The final agreement on Chagaramas that finally ceded Chagaramas to this country, Ellis was involved.
He was famous for his parties and entertained in grand style, in these gardens, in these majestic dining rooms, in the ballroom. Ambassadors and investors, official visitors and friends were invited to dinner or cocktails, and he gave the best parties in town. The band would play, and the President's house would be alive with music, dance, and the bustle of butlers and kitchen staff. The President would dance.
I confess to you that in 50 years ago, I was seldom without 2 cases of champagne. This idea that I started drinking because there were some free drinks at President's house is one of the greatest fallacies that you could find. Solomon Hochoy, who became Governor General, a very excellent man. Louis Blanche-Fraser, who was almost a rival of his and who became Federal Financial Secretary. When these people were working for $160 a month, I was saving $600 a month. So anything I got at President's house was a big come down financially from what I could have earned in my early days and what I would have earned had I remained in practice.
1985 was a glittering year. Sir Ellis received Pope John Paul II. It was a particularly special occasion, and Sir Ellis introduced the Pope to his beloved mother, a devout Roman Catholic. That same year, Queen Elizabeth I visited this country, conferring on Sir Ellis Britain's highest honour of chivalry, the Grand Knight of the Order of the Bath. He now carried 4 knighthoods. In 1981, it was Sir Ellis who had the weighty responsibility of announcing the death of Trinidad and Tobago's first Prime Minister, Dr. Eric Williams. He carried the panicked young nation smoothly through the crisis and announced George Chambers as Dr. Williams' successor. President's house was also the venue for personal joys, such as the wedding reception for his son Peter, who took as his bride a former beauty queen, Suzanne Trabullet.
And Peter announced it, whereupon very discreetly Suzanne shed a little tear and so on and so on. And he turned very affectionately and told her not to cry and so on. And of course we had some champagne.
Three horses. They passed the finish line for the first time. It's a 3-horse race at this stage. It's son of a
He was also a patron of the sport of kings, horse racing, and he never missed a Saturday at the races.
The fact that you have a horse in a race and you want to see that horse win. You see it coming down the straight and you see it perhaps either being overtaken or just overtaking others. It's a terrific thrill.
Sir Ellis Clarke was criticized, even regarded as notorious by some. But he makes no apologies for his sophistication, his education, his worldliness, or his brandy Alexanders.
There are several accusations made against me, and most of them are accurate. I confess, and I do not deny, that I like pretty women, that I like ballroom dancing, that I like horse racing, that I enjoy a good drink, and the like. Now, I'd ask anybody, what is wrong with those things?
Like most high-profile men, he did not escape controversy, such as the issue surrounding the extension of Chief Justice Kelsick's term of office.
My successor was appointed designated before my term ended. So there was extreme pressure on me to quit. I think through all, Ellis kept his calm and, he rode the storm.
He was vindicated by the Privy Council's decision, which upheld his point of view.
My father was drawn into the overall allegations being made to do with the so-called Tesoro affair. And as someone, apart from being my father, someone who I know has always worked hard and tirelessly in the interests of Trinidad and Tobago, those allegations particularly hurt.
My own attitude in life is that let these things be bygones. And it's no use resurrecting them. It's no use reopening hurt wounds, and it's no use pointing fingers.
In 1986, his second term came to an end. It was the year in which a new government, the National Alliance for Reconstruction, came into office with a thundering majority. Sir Ellis left for London, as he put it, to walk through Hyde Park and have a quiet period of intellectual reflection. It was there that this reporter was to interview him for the first time at his home in West London. No intimate view of Sir Ellis is complete without mention of his wife, Ermintrude. Although a quiet presence, this lady has unfailingly stood by her husband all these years, rejoicing in his successes, sometimes chiding him, but always loving him.
I sometimes think that there isn't another one made like him exactly.
I wanted somebody absolutely reliable, somebody in whom I would have the greatest confidence, somebody who could really run my home, look after such children as we might have, and so on. And I got everything I had asked for.
The man who shaped our history is an ardent family man, an adoring father, and an absolutely doting grandfather.
I go on his shoulders and And he stands up and he walks to the car.
I've seen him as a doting grandfather, really. The attention these kids get from him is just unbelievable.
And they love
his whole attitude to life, loving it and being serious about it.
his goddaughter, Andrea Kelsick, a teacher who has always had Uncle Ellis in her life, also is a firm believer in him.
Many people have faults, and he's no exception. But in spite of his faults, I think that he has contributed a lot to this country, and I don't think it's appreciated. I don't think that I'm a teacher, and I think children should not only be aware of what's happening in the present, but I think they should be given a sense of history. You know, even at the infant level that I teach in the simplest forms, I think that it could be drawn to their attention very simply that this man did exist, and I don't find that happening at all.
Andrea's father, Justice Cecil Kelsick, shares this view.
In all of his socializing, I think behind it has always been the motive to benefit Trinidad and Tobago.
The retired president still socializes and entertains at home. He remains an excellent host, whose guests are often treated to his personal concoction of brandy, bitters, champagne, and creme de cassis. Sir Ellis is also a peaceful man, quietly charitable, and more on the spiritual side than most would imagine.
The basic philosophy by which I've lived my life is recognition that there is nothing I can do by myself. I firmly believe that whatever I have, whatever I am, is a gift to me, a divine gift. It's God's power, and if I do something, I'm only acting as his instrument.
Most mornings, he can be seen attending Mass, taken by Father Lyfook at the chapel of the school at which they bent their heads over books as classmates more than 60 years ago. His religion is intertwined with certain philosophical questions, answers to which have helped him live his life.
The first thing to do is to ask yourself the basic question: what is life about? Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? In other words, until you answer those questions, you have no philosophy of life.
The end of his public life has not meant the end of service. Sir Ellis today acts as a consultant to lawyers in his chambers on Frederick Street. As we leave him to his privacy, we thank this man of great charm, wit, accomplishment, joie de vivre, spirituality and service.
He turned 75 last year, and I hope he lives to see many, many more birthdays.
For Sir Ellis Clarke is the father of the Constitution of this nation and a truly exceptional Caribbean man.
Oh, Danny boy, I love you so.